Welcome back to part 6 of my plant biology micro lectures and the last section on oversimplified concepts. I'll be tackling specifically sexual reproductive organs in this video. If you're more interested in asexual reproduction, that'll be covered in a coming propagation micro lecture. Furthermore, we won't be going over the reproductive systems of early plants such as mosses and ferns in this video. Those will be covered in one about plant evolution. Recurring theme here, sorry. For now, let's get started on spermophyte sex and all the organs that go with it. Spermophytes are seed plants, the evolution of which revolutionized plant life on dry land. First came gymnosperms approximately 300 million years ago, their name meaning naked seed. These plants have male and female cones, and in modern times we see them as conifers, cycads, we see up top, netae, we see at the bottom, and ginkgos. Ginkgos are very cool and very strange, and I think I'll give them their own video later, so keep an eye out for that. But they are gymnosperms, even if it looks like they have fruit, which leads us to our second type of spermophyte, angiosperms, evolving around 130 million years ago, which names mean hidden seeds. These plants have seeds which form in the ovaries of flowers. These ovaries swell into fruit once fertilized, though there are exceptions. Now, there is something we need to go over regarding fruits. There is the culinary definition of fruit and the botanical definition. We will obviously be using the botanical definition, but what's the difference? A botanical fruit is the swollen ovary of a flower. The culinary definition seems to be a little more limited, and to me, the classification seems pretty arbitrary. We don't really run into the issue of culinary fruits being called fruits incorrectly. That usually lines up apples, peaches, cherries, etc. The real problem is that botanical fruits are often classified as vegetables in culinary terms. Cucumbers, tomatoes, peas, and squash are all botanical fruits, but are considered vegetables by the general public. Okay, there are arguments with tomatoes, but there should be dissent with all of them. Okay, have I rambled long enough about that? Awesome. Let's check out a few reproductive organs. I was never actually taught the intricacies of cones in my own schooling, so we're going to learn about them together today. The female seed cone is called a megastrobilus, and the male pollen cone is called microstrobilus. You can see we get those names from the size difference of the two. In some groups, you will find both mega and microstrobili on the same tree, while in others there are male plants bearing only microstrobili, and female plants which bear only megastrobili. Now, you may see something like this on a conifer tree, and these are not microstrobili. They're easy to tell apart once you know what you're looking at, but if you've never seen this and it may confuse you, if you're not, I'm here to warn you not to get all up into something that looks like this because it's a fungus. Yay! Now you know. Anyway, pollen is wind dispersed in most gymnosperms, and the pollen cones aren't that stimulating, except for your allergies. Hey-o! So let's give megastrobili more attention. Each scale protects seeds, and as they mature, the cone opens to release them. In this image, we see the wings present on some gymnosperm seeds, which will aid dispersal via wind. There are many species-dependent signals for the cones to open, some of them being humidity and others the extreme heat of fire. So there's many different kinds of dispersal. On to angiosperms, and with that, our typical flower. Nature doesn't really care about our endless need to classify things, and as such, it likes to throw a lot of exceptions at us. But let's start basic and then look at some of these exceptions and the genera that house them. I didn't really like any of the labeling on the diagrams I found online, so we're going to use this cross-section and a bunch of arrows. If you have the means, find a flower yourself, cut it in half, and follow along. I'll wait. Got it? Yes, I'm sure you've gone and done this. Here's mine. We'll be working our way up, getting more complicated as we go before looking closer at the male and female portions. Each flower is borne by a peduncle, or stalk. The connecting point of peduncle to the rest of flower is called the receptacle. Next, we have 4 layers of organs all arranged in a whorled pattern, which simply means they're evenly spaced around the stem, like a wheel. The first of these whorls is the calyx. The calyx is made up of several sepals, which are modified leaves that may still be photosynthetic, but whose main purpose is to protect the young flower bud. Next, we have the petals themselves, forming the whorl known as the corolla. The main function of petals is to attract pollinators, so in plants that are wind-pollinated, they're either nondescript or absent. The corolla together with the calyx is called the perianth and is the sterile part of the flower. On to the non-sterile anatomy of flowers, which each get their own slide. The female portion of a flower has its own whorl, the pistil. The female reproductive system of plants is a bit of a hot mess in terms of vocabulary, so I'm going to introduce each term before explaining the differences between it and the last term. Hopefully we can get through it. Starting easy enough, the gynosium consists of all female reproductive parts of the plant. The pistil is the female reproductive parts of the flower. So if someone gives you a whole ass plant and says harvest the gynosium, I'm gonna look that up. I'm back. It's gynecium. So let's try this again. If someone gives you a plant and says harvest the gynecium, you'll have a pile of pistils. If they say cut out the pistil, you'll just harvest the one. Now, the carpel is the set of female reproductive organs, being the stigma, style, and ovary. In a flower that has only one carpel, the pistil and carpel are used interchangeably. It's also referred to as a simple pistil. However, some flowers have multiple carpels fused together, and in this case, the pistil represents more than one carpel and is called a compound pistil. This is the case in this flower I have here, which you can see those multiple ovaries in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Making up the carpel, you have the stigma, which is the landing pad for pollen, the style, which connects stigma to ovary, and the ovary itself, which contains a chamber called the locule, which in turn holds the ovule, the to-be seed once fertilized. Ovaries may hold more than one ovule, and there may be one or more ovaries in a pistil. There are also different positions you'll find both ovary and ovule in. Really, all of this is species dependent, and we'll look at all the different manifestations during an upcoming plant identification microlecture. Luckily, the male portion is much easier to understand. Just like the entirety of a plant's female parts are referred to as the gynecium, the culmination of all male parts is called the andrecium. I'm sorry if I have mispronounced these. The pistil is the gynecium as the stamen is the andrecium. This is the male parts of a singular flower, but we don't have that complicated pistil-carpel situation. It's just the stamen, and there are usually many per flower. On the top of the filament is the anther, which is the source of pollen. The shedding of pollen is called anthesis. The filament is the stalk of the stamen, acting much like the style and carpels. That's all I got for you on male parts. Sorry for stumbling through words. They're hard. I mentioned difficulty in classification, and this is why. Not all flowers have all four of these whorls we were talking about: calyx, corolla, pistil, and stamen. If the flower does have all four whorls, it is called complete. If one or more whorls are missing, it is incomplete. Now, think of this as an entirely separate concept for a moment while I introduce perfect flowers, which have both male and female parts, and imperfect flowers, which only have one or the other. Okay, let's go through some reviews. A flower can be complete and perfect. A flower can be incomplete and imperfect. A flower can be incomplete and perfect. A flower cannot be complete and imperfect, right? Because if a flower is missing the calyx, it still has a pistil and stamen and is therefore perfect. But if pistil or stamen is missing, then it's a game over. It's officially imperfect. A flower that has a pistil but no stamen is referred to as pistillate, while a flower with a stamen and no pistil is staminate. Actinomorphic flowers have petals which all have the approximate same size and shape and are radially symmetrical. Think daisies and lilies. Zygomorphic flowers have petals that are not the same shape and size and are only bilaterally symmetrical, like pansies and snapdragons. Sympedalous flowers have fused flower petals which commonly form trumpet shapes, while apopetalous flowers have distinct petals. Finally, solitary flowers have one flower per peduncle, while those with an inflorescence have multiple flowers on one peduncle. The stalks which connect these flowers to the peduncle are called pedicels. There's a lot more to the world of flower classification, but these are the basics that you'll need for a base understanding of lessons to come. Once a flower with female parts present is fertilized, and sometimes when it isn't, the ovary will swell into what we call a pericarp, which is made up of 3 distinct layers. From outside in, the exocarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. Fruits may be formed from 1 or more carpels and may contain 1 or more seeds. Tissues other than the ovary can be included in the fruit, and when this is the case, the fruit is called an accessory fruit. True fruit contains the ovary. Accessory fruit has other tissues as well. As I said earlier, sometimes the flower will turn into a fruit even if it wasn't fertilized, and this is called a parthenocarpic fruit. Easy enough. But now let's get into classifications of fruit. Why am I getting into fruit more than flowers in this video? In my humble opinion, flower classifications are much more important to plant identification than fruit classifications. So the bulk of flower classifications goes into plant identification, and you get to sit through the fruity onslaught to come. Let's go. Simple fruits. 2 types, the first being fleshy. 3 types of fleshy fruit, the first being drupe. A drupe is comprised mostly of ovary tissue, though typically just 1 seed. The endocarp of a drupe is a stony pit and made up of sclerids. Remember, that's a type of sclerenchyma cell. Most times, the edible portion is the mesocarp, but in almonds, it's actually inside the endocarp. Other examples include stone fruits, which are cherries, peaches, and plums, coconuts, and olives. Pomes also have a tough endocarp, but they have multiple seeds, and their edible portion is mostly made up of swollen receptacle tissue, the base of a flower, if you'll remember. The carpel itself makes up the core, and the core is the true fruit of a pome. Examples of these include apples, pears, and quinces. Quick review here, drupes have stony pits made of the endocarp. Edible portion is the ovary tissue, while pomes have cores, which are the actual fruit, the swollen ovary, while the edible portion is receptacle tissue. When the pericarp, endocarp, mesocarp, and exocarp together, is fleshy throughout, the fruit is classified as a berry. Berries can contain multiple seeds, and examples include tomato, blueberry, eggplant, and grape. There are 2 types of special berry because fruitception is fun. The first is a Hesperidium, which has a leathery exocarp and mesocarp, while the endocarp is segmented, juicy, and edible. Citrus fruits are great examples of Hesperidia and are also the only example I could find. A pepo has a thick exocarp called a rind and includes watermelons, pumpkins, cucumbers, and squash. You can always impress your friends and say, watermelon is a berry, and then make them Google it, and they'll be like, no way. It's fun. Everything's fun. Simple fruits, part 2, dry fruits. These fruits have a dry pericarp once mature and are split up into 2 overarching categories before being divided into 6 types. The first 4 types are categorized as dehiscent, which means the pericarp splits at a definite point at maturity. These types are follicles, which split at one side like milkweed and magnolias, legumes, which split on 2 seams with the seeds on only 1/2 of the split fruit like in peas and beans, silicues, which also have 2 seams but have seeds borne on a central axis, exclusively found in the mustard family, and finally capsules, the most common, which are formed from multiple carpels and has multiple seams, exemplified by poppies, okra, and lilies. The next category is indehiscent fruit, which do not split open at maturity and typically have only 1 or 2 seeds per fruit. These include nuts, which have 1 seed and have very hard pericarps like walnuts, chestnuts, and pecans. And our last types get really messy, and every source I look at says a slightly different thing. Let's go over a few options. You have to make your own decision on these. Side note, I'll be going over a lot of sources, but just referring to each by its title. You can find the full citation in the description below. Okay. Our troubled children are achenes, samaras, caryopses, and schizocarps in no particular order. The concise Oxford Dictionary of Botany says schizocarps are not indehiscent fruit per se, but are rather an intermediate between dehiscent and indehiscent. Horticulture Principles and Practices places Caryopses, Acquaahs, and Samaros under the umbrella of schizocarps, but then kind of describes them all as their own type anyway, much like the Biology of Horticulture does. Both the Biology of Horticulture and the Oxford Dictionary rely on the beginning definition of Acquaahs and modify certain aspects to describe some of the other types. For an oversimplified example, a Samara is like an Acquaah, but has a wing. Messy. I'm going to classify all of these as indehiscent fruit and define each to the best of my ability, collecting all common agreements and leaving out disagreements, trying to make them independent of each other. And then you can rely on your own decision or your professors for the classification part of things. Or I guess just Google it. I just don't want to be the one to tell you wrong. So, Acquaahs have one seed, which is attached to the pericarp, like in buttercups and sunflowers, and the seeds of strawberries. The surface dots are the true fruit, Acquaahs, while the strawberry is that accessory fruit like we see in pomes. It's made up of receptacle tissue. Samaros also have one seed and a wing-like structure attached to the pericarp, like in maples and elms. Caryopses have one seed, but it's fused to the pericarp, as in pretty much all grains, including corn. Finally, schizocarps have paired seeds, 2 ovaries, which mature as their own entity and typically break apart at maturity. I cautiously say all of the terms on this page include a thin pericarp, but don't rely on that assumption, please. All right, the end is in sight, I promise. There are 2 non-simple fruits, the first of which is aggregate fruit. This is formed from a single flower that contains many pistils and includes raspberries and blackberries. To add a little more complication to this, raspberries and blackberries are also drupes. Each of those little subunits is its own drupe fused together to form the aggregate fruit. Multiple fruits are formed from many flowers, all born on the same inflorescence and fused together as they ripen. They have many Oh no! This is now just blatant disagreement between my main texts, Horticulture Principles and Practices, and the Biology of Horticulture. You know what else is blatant disagreement? Strawberries. No one can agree, apparently, when you Google if strawberries are multiple or aggregate fruits. So let's drag this video out even longer and get to the bottom of both of these, because by golly, y'all are going to learn something today. First, multiple fruit receptacles. Obviously, a multiple fruit starts out with many receptacles because there are many flowers. But does it? My journey begins when I realized that maybe receptacles are at the top of a peduncle, but not a pedicel. Can't find much online. Here, there's many flowers on one receptacle, but this is just one type of inflorescence. What about others? Where's the receptacle? Okay, let's look at figs. One receptacle over many flowers. Okay, pineapples. From what we've learned, the core is definitely either all receptacle or mostly receptacle. Yeah, there we go. Shared by all flowers too. All right, my educated summarization is that these inflorescences don't have the chance to make multiple fruits. They're too far apart. To become a multiple fruit, you likely need to have a single receptacle, meaning yes, multiple fruits still only have one receptacle like aggregate fruits, but they have many flowers. Easy. Don't quote me on this though, but I tried my best. If you see this and you know the real explanation and definitions, please reach out. Okay, on to strawberries. So we know we're not talking about strawberries as we know them as the general public because the red edible portions are receptacle tissue. We're really asking if these Acquaahs are multiple or aggregate, and we can't rely on the shared receptacle tissue because both have them, right? Right. I'm feeling better about my claims on the last slide now. So the way we'll determine this is the flower structure. Is it solitary or an inflorescence? Looks pretty solitary. Double check because I have trust issues now. All right, aggregate for sure. Google and Carnegie Museums, you did us dirty. Don't worry, I'll send an email or ticket or something to see if they can fix the results for queries like this, unless there's some great secret inflorescence in strawberry flowers that I missed. And we're done. This was a hard micro lecture to create, but I'm glad I was able to do the heavy lifting so you didn't have to. I hope you learned some things, and I also hope you retain some of them. And I hope you don't get discouraged getting into the messy parts of botany, even with all my griping, because it was fun to do some investigating and make my own discoveries. If all you're doing as a botanist is reading from books and regurgitating information, you're doing it wrong. Get out there, question things, dissect everything you can to make connections from the base information provided to you by those books. And remember, we've lost 99.9% of our tallgrass prairie in America since European settlement. That's 25 million acres to less than 300,000 acres. And you'd be horrified to learn how many remnants of virgin prairies have for sale signs right now. Untouched prairie, 5,000 years in the making, can be destroyed in less than a week for a suburban housing hell or big box store. Look into it. Until next time.